A new version of DLSS has been released a couple of days ago. Is this worth using in Tarkov in 2026? Today I've tested and experimented with loads of different DLSS setups to try to determine the pros and cons of each, so let's get into it. Before you start, most of us will want to be using the Nvidia app. The update for DLSS 4.5 was in beta before, but now it's out for everyone. I know I'll get the Nvidia Profile Inspector purists coming out of the woodwork here, but the majority of people simply don't want to tinker on that level. So make sure that you've updated both the Nvidia app and updated your graphics drivers as well to the latest version before you try to do anything here. These updates will allow you to select the two new presets, M and L. These have not yet been added to Tarkov's actual game settings menu, so to get these new models you need to go to the Nvidia app itself, click on Escape from Tarkov, scroll all the way to the bottom and click on DLSS Override Model Presets. Navigate over to Custom at the top and then select a model from the Super Resolution menu, which should show A through F, J, K, L and M, the last two of which are the new ones. If all of this is gibberish to you, I'll be explaining what it all means right now, so if you're already well versed in upscaling technologies, then you might want to skip to the next part. But for everybody else, to understand why this is important, let's review our options. Why do we want to fiddle with this stuff in the first place? Starting right from the beginning with no anti-aliasing at all, this is what it looks like in Tarkov. It does not look good graphically, and although the picture is stable when stationary, it's very unstable in motion. This makes it harder to spot player movement when the rest of the scene is dancing around. These jagged edges appear because of an effect called aliasing, which most people will be familiar with. So next we have TAA High. This stands for Temporal Anti-Aliasing and is a traditional AA method to remove these edges and is much more stable in movement, but not always stable when stationary. It gives the whole world a bit of a blurry look as well, and there are whole hate groups out there for TAA because it has a bad reputation for making games smeary and nasty to look at. Although there are better standard anti-aliasing methods, this is the best we've got implemented in Tarkov natively. Next we have the two upscalers, DLSS and FSR. Both of these work by rendering the game smaller than your native resolution and then upscaling it using a neural network algorithm that reconstructs images better than it was possible to do before this technology came out. The idea here is that it reduces the load on your GPU, allowing for higher frames for a similar picture quality, but interestingly it also takes over the anti-aliasing function as part of how it works, and often ends up superior to TAA. The first upscaler is DLSS, which is really what this video is about. This usually has the best overall stability and picture quality, both when stationary and when in motion, but you can get potential blurring here too, depending on the settings, and there is a specific issue currently in Tarkov where certain scopes are bugged, but more on this in a moment. This technology also only runs on Nvidia GPUs. Finally, we have FSR, AMD's version of DLSS, which runs on any GPU, but the quality is usually seen as lower than DLSS in general. To compound on this, FSR 4, which is the latest version, is not implemented in EFT either at the moment, so we're behind on tech as far as FSR is concerned too. People usually only use this when they have to, don't have an Nvidia card, and also dislike TAA. So given this video is about the release of DLSS 4.5, we'll be focusing mostly on this and those two models, but it's important to appreciate the other alternatives to understand the pros and cons as to why you should use one over another. DLSS itself has a few different presets now that are signified by different letters. The older original models, referred to as the CNN models, are signified by presets A through F. When Tarkov started using DLSS, this was on preset D, and has since been replaced with preset F, which is still selectable in-game today. About a year ago, a new model was released that superseded the old CNN version, called the Transformer model, under the presets J and K. K is often seen as the default, but they are both based on the same technology, just with different parameters. J uses less information from previous frames, called temporal information, which means that the picture that it creates is more shimmery, but has less potential ghosting. K uses more temporal information, on the other hand, which creates a more stable picture, but it has the potential for more ghosting issues with the produced image. At this point, you can probably see why the whole discussion here is a bit nuanced and tricky, because there's no one-size-fits-all setting, because it all depends on what hardware you have, specifically the size of your monitor, the game you're playing, and also some personal preference. With the new DLSS 4.5 update this week, we have been presented with two new presets, M and L, which are the second generation Transformer models. M is seen as the default, and it's important to note that you shouldn't expect to see any performance improvements with these presets over J or K, because they are more advanced and computationally heavier than the first gen Transformer counterparts. In fact, if you have a 30 series card or lower, you will actually probably see a deterioration in performance because they utilize some hardware improvements made in the 40 series GPUs and up that isn't present in the earlier models. You can still run them with the older hardware though, but at the cost of some GPU performance, because it's basically just trying to do something that it wasn't built to do. In Tarkov though, this may well not be a problem because many of us are already CPU bound in the situations where it matters, such as Streets of Tarkov or looking at that one building on customs where we always see our lowest FPS counts. And our GPUs often have a bit of headroom anyway, so you might want to try it even if you have a 30 or 20 series Nvidia card. But importantly, these new models are also supposed to look better at lower quality settings than even the last set that we had. What I mean by this is that all of the DLSS presets from A through F, J and K, and M and L are subject to an additional control, which is the mode, most commonly quality, balance, and performance, because these are the ones that we have in Tarkov. And what this determines is the render size of the base game before applying the upscale. So the higher quality that you select, the bigger the starting image is, and the better the potential quality of the upscaled picture would be, because the algorithm doesn't have to do as much work to replace the missing information. But naturally, this comes at the cost of GPU performance because it's having to render the game in a larger starting size. As I said before, in Tarkov, GPU performance often doesn't matter as much as in other games, so I typically use quality, and for reference, quality uses just under half of the normal pixels as native, so only 45%, which is quite surprising. Balanced only uses 1/3 and performance only uses 1/4, so we are talking a lot less pixels to render overall. According to Nvidia, with the new models M and L, because these are more advanced and require more power to run, M is intended for use with DLSS performance and L for ultra performance when pushing 4K resolutions. However, you can use them for any quality mode that you like. So now that we hopefully know what we're talking about, which ones should you use? I've been testing both M and L under a few different circumstances along with all of the others, and they are certainly different to J and K. They seem much more prone to aliasing type effects, which leads to a less stable picture under movement, but they have resolved ghosting entirely as far as I can tell. This means that M and L look a little bit low quality when being used indoors, at least to my eyes, when the in-game models and objects are primarily straight lines, as you see the jittery effect that you get with anti-aliasing being a bit lacking around the edges of these objects. But on the other hand, they look really good in outdoor environments. You can see in this factory clip the lower quality of the edges around the lighting and around the doorway of the medical tent, and this isn't present when using either J or K. That one in particular, I was using preset L on quality mode, so that should be the best picture quality that you can get on the 4.5 DLSS. Conversely, inside, J and K look near perfect, but one of the big problems right now that we have specifically in Tarkov 1.0 is that these first gen transformer models make scopes go blurry, and that is still true as of this recording. It's at its worst in the 1x modes, and it gets less bad as you zoom in, but it makes lots of them really nasty to use and borderline unusable, so I've felt a bit forced to use TAA high up until now. This has really sucked because they are my personal favourite settings to use, especially preset J, which minimises a specific form of ghosting which the K preset is prone to. A lot of people recommend preset K, but I don't like it because there's a specific effect that appears primarily when the foreground and the background are very similar and are moving past each other relatively slowly. You often see the foreground trail over the background, and once you see it, it's really off-putting in outside areas where there are lots of trees and foliage. Model J is not immune to it either, but reduces this effect a lot because of its lower reliance on temporal information. I also started using J in Grey Zone Warfare as well to combat this because there's a lot of trees in that game too. With M and L though, this effect is entirely removed, which is why natural environments work so well with the new model. There are some instances of a similar effect on man-made structures as well, where J and K don't reconstruct the image correctly in movement around certain railing type models as demonstrated in this clip on Ground Zero, but M and L reduce these errors down massively as well. Based on all the testing that I did, once the scope bug is fixed, my preference would be J for inside maps, such as factory, and L for outside maps. Although, unfortunately, because these presets aren't in the Tarkov menu yet, you have to do a full game close and reopen to change the mode, which at the moment isn't worth it for DLSS mode swap. So in summary, if you have a 40 series GPU or higher, I think you should give L a try and see what you think. For 30 series and lower, you probably want to try M on performance at most, but have a tinker and see if it affects you at all, because it might not depending on how powerful your CPU is and hence how bottlenecked you are. The general rule of thumb is if you can play without noticing low FPS, then it's probably fine, and that will depend on what you're used to and what you tolerate personally. For now, if you're confused, until the scope bug is fixed, TAA high is at least a safe bet, despite not being the best option in terms of visual clarity or noise reduction. But once the scopes are back to normal, I still think J is a very viable DLSS option for those without the latest gen cards, as it works very well in almost all situations. For those with 40 series GPUs and up, you probably should try M and L to see what you think, because you might absolutely love it. Unfortunately, DLSS is only getting more complex as time goes on, so keep tinkering and let me know if you've had any great successes in 1.0 with some secret settings. So as usual, a big shout out to all my patrons, and as always, have fun in your raids.